They stood before me, in the very house I had built, and spoke in voices cold as steel. "Mother, it's time to sell it." With just one sentence, everything I had ever believed collapsed. That was the moment I realized the battle to reclaim this house had begun. I had once believed blood would never betray, but I was wrong, bitter to the bone. It all started with small details, the door opening slightly each night, documents disappearing, my children's looks growing distant. They returned, not to love, but to take. They thought me weak, easy to break, but they had forgotten. This house holds my soul, and I will not let anyone steal it. This is a story of betrayal, greed, and a mother who rises to take revenge. If you think a woman cannot stand against them all, watch how I turn silence into a storm. Listen to me. From the moment the nightmare began. I have lived in this mansion for more than 30 years. A house tucked into the hillside, facing straight out to the sea, where each morning the first sunlight pours through the large windows and floods the room with a warm, golden light. I used to call this place my little paradise, but lately, that paradise has begun to fall unnaturally silent. No more family laughter. No more familiar footsteps, only the wind whining through the cracks and the waves pounding the cliffs below like whispers from the past. I began to notice strange things. First, the back door. I always locked it before going to bed, but in recent weeks, every morning I found it slightly ajar. Just a narrow slit, enough for the sea breeze to slip in and leave a damp, salty smell on the wooden floor. I told myself I must be getting old, forgetting to lock it, but I never forget anything in this house. This is where I placed every brick, every plank, every window frame. Not a single detail escapes me. Then there was the stack of papers in Victor's study, my husband's. Since the day he died, I had almost never stepped inside. I kept it exactly as it was, as if by not touching it, he would still be there. But one afternoon, when the study door suddenly blew open in the wind, I discovered a bundle of files had been disturbed. Some pages had been pulled out. There were fingerprints that were not mine. I sat for hours in Victor's old chair, where he used to work every evening. My hand brushed the wood surface, worn shiny by years. In that silence, I felt as if someone was watching me. Not a hallucination, but an invisible presence, faint yet spine-chilling. After that, I started to surveil my own house. Every corridor, every door, every sliver of light slipping under the eaves. I noticed small scratches on doorknobs, soft footsteps on the wooden floor at midnight, and a strange perfume lingering on the stairs. I live alone. I know I am not mad. Something or someone had stepped into my territory. At first I thought it might be a thief, but then I remembered, only people who carry our name know every nook and cranny of this house. And that truth made my blood run cold. I began to see family photo frames slightly askew, drawers half open, though I was certain I had closed them. I decided to try a small test. I left a fake key on the table next to the back door. The next morning, it was gone. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks. It had simply vanished. When I looked at that empty space, my heart hammered as if someone had just stood in the room and silently mocked me. That night, I lay on the wide bed, listening to the ticking of the wall clock reverberate through the house. Each tick was like a knife tapping softly against my patience. Outside the window, the wind rose. The sea howled as if a soul were awakening. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, and in that briefness, I swore I heard footsteps, not from imagination.
Real. I sprang up, gripping the wooden cane placed beside the bed. Darkness cloaked the hallway. The smell of sea salt hung in the air. I walked slowly, quietly, listening to the smallest sounds. As I neared Victor's study, a chill ran down my spine. The door stood wide open, though I had locked it that afternoon. I saw no one inside, only the curtains fluttering in the breeze and the wooden chair slightly swiveled, making a faint creak. It felt as if someone had just risen, not long ago. The next morning I looked at my face in the mirror, hair white as snow, wrinkles carved deep like the cuts of time. But something in my eyes had changed, a new vigilance. I had once been a gentle wife, a forgiving mother. But when this house, the last legacy of Victor and me, was threatened, I knew I could not continue living in fear. Something was lurking, and I would find it. I began altering my daily routine, lights out early, but I would not sleep. I paced the halls in the dark, listening to every sound. I memorized the positions of objects. I secretly installed a small camera at the back door without telling anyone. And then, what I had sensed came to pass. One night, at about 3 a.m, a soft click sounded from the back door. I held my breath, my hand tight around the cane. Through dim light, I saw the shadow of a person at the doorframe. They did not force the door. They had a key. Their footsteps were light, familiar, too familiar. When that shadow slipped into the corridor, I did not rush out. I only stood there, heart pounding, lips pressed tight, because by then, I knew. Not a stranger, someone from this house, a piece of my past. The next morning, I opened an old wardrobe and took out the wooden box I had kept for 20 years. Inside were documents that only Victor and I knew about. When the light fell on the yellowed pages, I understood that this was not merely about a house being watched. This was a battle to reclaim the family soul. I gently laid my hand on the wooden doorframe, where Victor had once driven each nail, and whispered, "I will not let anyone take this away. Not even those who share our blood." The sea wind blew hard through the windows, making the white curtains billow like dancing ghosts. But this time, I did not tremble. I had awakened from a long sleep, for when a mother has been silent too long, the moment she rises will no longer be tears, but vengeance. And this house, where I once lived, loved, and lost, will now become my battlefield. From that night on, the house was no longer as quiet as before. Every wall, every crack of the doors seemed to whisper things that only I could hear. Darkness ceased to be the companion of loneliness and became a silent warning. I knew then that what I had sensed was no longer a hallucination. And then they returned. That morning when I stepped out onto the veranda, the sound of wheels on gravel rolled slowly, heavily. I looked up, and at the end of the tree-lined lane, a sleek black car came to a stop. The door popped open, and Elena stepped out first, my eldest daughter. Right after her came Daniel, my youngest son, whom I hadn't seen in many years. My first feeling was not joy. It was a cold shiver down my spine. Perhaps because their arrival was so perfectly timed, right after all those strange nights in this house.
"We missed you, Mother," Elena said in a sugary voice, but her gaze skimmed over the doorway as if she were a guest appraising a property, not a child returning home. Daniel was different. His eyes were hesitant, evasive. Still, I could see one thing. Neither of them had come back out of affection. They had come for something larger. I invited them inside. The living room brightened as I threw the windows wide. but no matter how much sunlight poured in, the air remained heavy, as if a black cloud hovered above the ceiling. I poured tea and set it on the table. My hand shook slightly, not from emotion, but from restrained anger. "It's been a long time. The house hasn't been this full in ages," I said lightly, though my heart hammered in my chest. Elena lounged on the sofa, a posture that proclaimed her the mistress of the house. She spoke sweetly, but there was a thin blade hidden behind every word. "We thought it's time. You should live more comfortably."
Living alone in this huge mansion must be hard, right? If we sell it, you can move somewhere more convenient, and with the remaining money, you won't have to worry about anything. I tightened my grip around the teacup. The warmth steamed my palm, but I did not let go. I said nothing. I simply stared straight at Elena. She smiled, a false smile so sharp it made my heart ache. Elena was clever, keen. The sharpness that once made her father proud had now turned into something cold as steel. Daniel cleared his throat, hesitant. "I just thought, you're lonely living alone. Selling the house might be better for you." His words were light as the breeze, but they struck me like a dagger. This is the house Victor and I built with our whole lives. Every step, every brick soaked with sweat and memory. And they, the children I raised with my own 2 hands, spoke of selling it as casually as if it were an old piece of furniture. I smiled, a smile I barely recognized on my face, a little bit bitter. "You seem to miss this house a lot. How long has it been since you came back?" Elena paused. Daniel looked down. No one answered. The truth was they had long since forgotten this home, until something valuable inside it called them back. Elena began to open the suitcase of documents. Everything was prepared. "I know someone at a real estate firm. They can value the house quickly. We can sell it for a good price. Mother, you only need to sign here." She placed the paper before me. The black ink was neat and clear. The signature box in the lower right corner gaped like a ready trap. I remembered the night before, the ajar door, the shadow in the hallway, the familiar footsteps. And now they sat here saying, "For Mother's sake," while scheming to take away the last thing I had. I set the teacup down. The dry click sound echoed in the silence and made Daniel flinch. "You haven't come back because you miss me." "You've come back because of this house." I spoke slowly, pronouncing each word. Elena raised an eyebrow. Daniel began to open his mouth, but she shot him a look that stopped him. "Mother, you misunderstand. We only want what's best for you." "What's best for me?" I let out a thin, cold laugh. "How amusing! What do you know about what's best for me?" The room sank into a heavier silence. Only the ticking of the clock remained. I looked at my 2 children, Elena cunning, Daniel wavering, and felt a painful truth. This family was no longer what it used to be. Something rose up inside me. Not tears, but flame. I did not drive them away. Instead, I gave them a gentle, sweet smile, the kind I used to soothe them when they were little. "All right. Let me think it over. Indeed, it is lonely for me here alone." Elena's face lit up with a victorious smile at once. Daniel exhaled in relief. They did not know that I had begun to play my own game.
That evening, the mansion sank into silence again. But this silence no longer terrified me. It was the silence of someone awake and alert. I looked out to the garden where Victor had planted the first olive tree when we built the house. He used to tell me, "This house is not merely a shelter. It is the heart of our family. Whoever betrays it, betrays us." I closed my eyes and swore to myself, Elena may be clever, Daniel may be weak, but this is my battlefield, and I, the mother they underestimated, will make them pay. The next day I invited them to stay a while longer, saying I wanted to think more about selling. Elena thought she had already won. Daniel just wanted peace, and I had only just begun. Darkness fell outside. The house grew still again, but this time it stood with me. I knew every crack in the wall,
every shadowed corner of the past. They think this is just an old mansion, but to me, this is a fortress.
And I, the betrayed mother, would be the one to make the final move. The family meeting was over, but the real war had only just begun. From that night, the house was no longer quiet as before. Every wall, every crack of the doors seemed to whisper things that only I could hear. Darkness was no longer the companion of loneliness, but had become a silent warning. I knew what I had been sensing was no longer a hallucination. And then they returned. Since that night, the two children left the living room with fake smiles. I sat alone in the dark. But this time, not out of fear. I took out the old pack of cigarettes Victor used to keep in the drawer, peeled it open, only to not light one. My hand sighed over the old ash streaks and memories of him, sharp, alive, as if he had just risen from the chair, surged in like a violent wave. Victor had always been a man of few words, but sure footing. He never wore his feelings where others could see. He kept everything like secrets in a safe, careful, cautious, and full of intent. Before he left this world, that night I still see whenever I close my eyes, he pulled me close, gripped my hand with fingers callous from work, and whispered a sentence that, from then on, every brick in this house seemed to breathe out. Keep this house. It hides a truth only you can find. That sentence, like a carved command, followed me through the lonely years. At first I thought it was simply his way of calming a wife terrified of a future without him. But gradually, as each item he left behind, each old letter, each bill, and every photograph were rearranged, I realized Victor had not spoken lightly. He had seen something, a fracture in the world we called family, and he wanted me to keep the flame, keep the evidence, keep the memory, keep the truth. I remember clearly the day he said it. The sky was gray and drizzle tapped outside the window. He sat beside me, his hair thin with gray, eyes deep as a man who had lived his life. "My love," he said slowly, each word like a knife scored into the heart. "This house is not just brick walls or wooden floors. It is a witness. There are things we cannot let the world forget. If anything happens, you must keep it. Do you understand?" I nodded, but inside I felt a vague sense, as if there was something he had not finished saying. He promised to tell me later when the time was right, but illness came faster than his promise. Victor left, leaving that suspended sentence between two walls. He left the house, the photographs, and a promise I did not know where to begin fulfilling. For years I dared not touch much in his study. I feared that touching a paper, an envelope, would make memories dissolve, or that what he wanted me to protect would be revealed. But strangely, that fear was not from wanting to hide, but from reverence. I kept things not out of uselessness, but because every document, every copy, every letter could be a fragment to piece together the picture of truth Victor had once seen. When Elena and Daniel stood before me with the house sale papers, the shadow of the anvil threatening their greed was clear. I understood that Victor's promise was not a casual remark. Outsiders might look at this house and see valuable real estate. Insiders would recognize the value of memory. But Victor, I believed, saw something else. A formula, evidence, or proof of wrongdoing that only those within the family would hold. He entrusted me with preserving it as if handing over a secret heart. I began to search, not hurriedly, not recklessly, but methodically. Every drawer, every bedside cabinet, every painting on the wall was inspected under a different gaze. The gaze of someone searching for truth.
The other day, when I touched an old rug in the living room, my fingertips accidentally brushed a small seam near the baseboard. A brittle piece of wood crumbled, and beneath it was a small hollow,
seemingly designed to conceal. My heart pounded. My hands went icy. Victor had planned for this long ago. Old papers, a rusted bunch of keys, a few unsigned letters. Everything looked like scattered pieces. But as I arranged them, clues gradually revealed another story. There were notes about account numbers, figures and symbols Victor used to encode. There were photographs of certain company employees in compromising positions, invoices, documents proving strange transfers of money. I felt the breath of truth closing in, and at the same time, fear rose. If I uncovered it, I would no longer be the keeper of silence. I would hold the power that strips people bare. In the nights that followed, I stayed up very late, the pale desk lamp casting light over yellowed pages. Each time I read, it was as if I heard Victor's voice at my ear. Don't rush. Think. If necessary, wait for the right moment. But that waiting became urgent when Elena and Daniel appeared. Their greed was a danger, and I realized that if I did not act shrewdly, all evidence could be exposed, stolen, or twisted. I decided I needed a strategy, not to fight with violence, but with memory and the law. I began to copy important documents, photograph old photos, record Victor's words I still remembered. Every step I took was measured like a move on a chessboard, because I understood that a small mistake could cost me everything: the house, the memories, and justice. Meanwhile, the memories of Victor were more than papers. I remembered when he taught me how to read a contract, how to inspect a seal, how to spot a forged signature. He had passed on to me a bit of meticulous legal knowledge that I once thought redundant, but now those lessons were weapons.
Victor, by teaching me how to look, had given me the ability to understand and to fight. Perhaps his cunning plan, to give me the tools, to give me a responsibility. One night, while rereading the letter Victor left in the safe, I cried. Not from loss, but from a strange emotion. Gratitude mixed with anger. Grateful that he trusted me. Angry that he had to keep a secret that cost us years of family happiness. I wondered, was that secret worth how many years of family bliss? Was it worth him leaving in silence while still clutching worry? But now is not the time to ask the worth of truth. Now is the time to act. I gathered what was necessary, stacked copies into a small wooden box, locked it, and hid it where only I knew. I installed a few security measures, called a trusted lawyer, not to sell, but to prepare for the confrontation ahead. What Victor said back then was no longer a promise reserved for two people. It became my oath. Keep the house, keep the truth, and, when needed, expose those who would trade kinship for money. People may call that revenge. I will not deny it, but to me, it is justice. And in the silence of the house, beneath the dim light and the steady sound of waves outside, I felt a waking power. Victor had handed me a lamp, and now I would use that lamp to illuminate the dark corners of the human heart. I will find the truth, and when I do, I will decide how to repay those who have forgotten who built this roof. The nights I spent rummaging through documents, staying vigilant in every corner of the house, slowly came to an end, only for a new current to seep into my life. It was no longer just a threat from the outside anymore. It was a conspiracy being woven right within the heart of my own family. What Victor had entrusted me to protect suddenly became more urgent than ever. I knew that promise wasn't merely a memory to cradle. It was a guiding light in the storm that was about to break. Elena appeared, not with love, but with a counterfeit smile and rehearsed words of worry from mother. She came carrying a plan that had been calculated to the smallest detail. I had never seen anyone speak about money with such chilling detachment. In her eyes,
Everything was numbers and profit margins. She didn't come home to mend broken ties. She came to measure, to weigh how many coins each brick, each window frame could be traded for.
From small, seemingly harmless conversations, I gradually sensed a chain of events unfolding behind my back. Elena had contacted a major real estate firm in the city, a group of brokers in elegant suits with shimmering glass offices and honeyed promises. They spoke to her in that practiced, professional tone, mentioning quick appraisals, legal arrangements, and a convenient solution for Mrs. Maria. In their eyes, I was nothing more than an asset to be transferred, a package to be neatly wrapped up for sale. They convinced Elena that the fastest way to seize the house was to arrange for me to be placed in a nursing home, a quiet, controlled place where I could be cared for, kept silent, and removed from any legal process. Their polished, business-like tone, like negotiating a lucrative deal, made my skin crawl. They painted a perfect little scenario: a sale contract, a deposit, transfer procedures, and just one signature from a legal representative would be enough. A single tarp to cover it all. Daniel stood caught between two opposing winds. He wasn't malicious, only weak and easily swayed. I saw the turmoil in his eyes, the child I once loved, and the man slowly being pulled into his sister's web. Elena knew that well. She used memories, childhood recollections, and even guilt to suffocate Daniel. "Mother needs to be safe," she said. "Mother will live in a more comfortable place," she repeated like a well-rehearsed tune. Then she pulled out the numbers, bills, accounts, claiming how expensive maintaining the mansion had become, how Victor had left behind debts they now had to bear. Daniel, out of love and fear of responsibility, began to falter. But Elena didn't rely on words alone. She contacted the family's old doctor, scheduled secret meetings, produced forged photos, manipulated medical assessments, everything needed to weaken the image of a lucid mother in the eyes of outsiders. She began building evidence to make me appear unfit to manage property. Secret phone calls, deleted messages, a carefully choreographed performance. More than once, I overheard their conversations through a half-open door, Elena whispering to a man with a low, careful voice. He promised to arrange everything neatly, saying, "We don't need to do much. Just make them see the mother is a bit forgetful, and that's it." My mouth went dry. My chest tightened. They were betting everything on an image, an old mother, a little forgetful, ready to be protected. I remembered those nights when Victor taught me how to recognize forged signatures, how to distinguish a real seal. He had prepared me, not just with knowledge, but with vigilance. Now, that knowledge was my only weapon against their theater. I knew they could bring forged documents, a bought-off doctor, or a temporary guardian, but all of it would have to pass through the law, through seals, through procedures. And those procedures, if I knew how to intervene, could be stopped. Elena had planned another move. She wanted Daniel to sign on my behalf in temporary papers, persuading him that mother couldn't come to the office, that notarizing through power of attorney was necessary. Daniel, heavy-hearted, confused, almost agreed. He kept glancing at my hands, his eyes clouded with guilt. I saw his fear of my reaction, of Elena's wrath, of some unspoken secret that might be exposed if he refused. Elena saw it too, and used his fear to manipulate him. While they schemed, I began to counterattack, not with noise, not with haste. I wore the mask they wanted to see. By day, I pretended to be frail, forgetful, vague. By night, I stayed awake, examining every line, every seal, every hidden clue in Victor's papers. I copied documents, photographed old contracts, and secretly reached out to Sophia, the young lawyer I had met once at a bank. I told her little but enough.
I need someone I can trust. Someone who understands a conspiracy is being hidden. Sophia came. Her gaze was professional, but not cold. She examined the documents I handed her and said she would begin legal measures to protect the house. Temporary asset freezes, signature verifications, independent medical evaluations. Those legal words were like light piercing through the thick night that Elena and her accomplices had spun. I felt hope, small but firm. Elena was not a fool. She began to suspect when she saw how indifferent I appeared during the day, yet always seemed to show up at decisive moments. She tried checking the file cabinet once, but I had already moved the important papers elsewhere. She brought real estate agents to inspect the house, but they were met with a cup of tea, my smile, and an invitation to stay for dinner they couldn't refuse.
While they talked excitedly about prices, I listened to every word, every gesture, memorized faces, voices, and the small slips that revealed their tactics. Elena's plan was meticulous, but there was one thing she hadn't accounted for: a mother's love and endurance. They thought they could use a nursing home as a trick to strip away my rights. They forgot. This house is not just property, it is evidence, memory, the foundation of a family. And those memories are guarded by sweat, by tears, and now by my clear mind. One night, while Elena was plotting her next move with a broker, Daniel sat quietly in a corner, his face pale. I walked over and placed my hand gently on his shoulder, warm and firm. "Do you remember your father?" I whispered. Daniel looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. For a brief moment, the walls between us cracked. I didn't beg. I only spoke the truth. This house belongs to the family. Not for money, not for fear. If you are still my son, stand with me.
Perhaps it was those words, or the look in my eyes, that woke Daniel up. He stepped out from the shadow of hesitation, and that was the first turning point of the war. Elena's eyes flashed with fury, like a beast exposed after hiding too long in the woods. The dark plan wasn't destroyed yet, but its mask had been torn away, and I, the mother they thought old, easy to defeat, had begun building legal barricades, gathering evidence, and learning to wield memory like a blade. People say revenge is the work of the mad. I am not mad. I am simply someone who was betrayed. And now I will reclaim everything the way Victor taught me, silently, precisely, and without ever revealing my heart.
The chill of that night seeped deep into my bones, as if to remind me that silence itself can be a deadly weapon. After the door of the family meeting room closed, the sound of Clara and Robert's footsteps echoed down the hallway like a scar that would never fade. They walked away with eyes as cold as stone, as if this house had belonged to them all along. I stood alone in the living room, staring up at the ceiling, yellowed with time. Perhaps they thought I was old now, easy to manipulate. Perhaps they had forgotten that every brick in this house, every stair, every tile on the roof was built by me and their father with our own hands and blood. They may try to take everything, but they will not swallow it so easily, not while I still draw breath. That night, I climbed the wooden staircase, each creak beneath my feet whispering reminders of everything this house had witnessed. A dim golden light cast itself down the hallway, stretching my shadow across the floor, like a ghost of the past unwilling to let go. I stopped before Victor's door. Since the day he left, this door had remained shut. The room of my eldest son, the one who once stood by me, then vanished from my life like the wind. No farewell, no explanation, only an aching void, like a wound carved into my chest. I pushed the door open. A stale draft rushed out, mingled with the scent of old wood and time. Everything remained exactly as it had been,
The old bookshelf against the wall, the clock frozen at precisely 2:17 a.m., the moment Victor walked out of this house. On the table sat the same ceramic cup he used every morning. I didn't know why I stepped into this room tonight. Perhaps it was because of my children's veiled threats, or perhaps it was the faint voice in my head whispering, "The truth is still here." I began to clean, dust swirling in the lamplight like tiny ghosts. When I pulled the bookshelf slightly away from the wall, a dry, sharp sound broke the stillness. Clack. I froze. Something was behind it. Leaning in, I used all my strength to push the shelf farther. Behind it lay a section of wall turned gray with age, and at its center ran a thin crack, like a deliberate incision. My fingertips brushed against it, cold as ice. My heart pounded faster, a shiver running down my spine. I couldn't explain it, but something inside that crack was waiting for me. I grabbed the fruit knife from Victor's desk drawer and carefully pried away the old plaster. It crumbled easily, as if it had long been rotting. And then, from within the opening, I pulled out a brown paper envelope and a small ring of keys tied with a faded red string. I saw the handwriting on the envelope, Victor's hand, tilted, urgent but clear. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there. I sat down on the floor, back against the wall, my hands trembling as I opened the letter. Everything around me fell into a terrifying silence. Wind howled through the cracks in the windows. The rustle of leaves against the roof sounded like whispers from the past. I read each line as if swallowing shards of memory Victor had left behind. Mother, I knew you'd find this one day. I couldn't tell you while I was still here, because some things are too big, too dangerous. Father didn't just leave behind this house. There is a hidden safe, something he kept from the entire family. Inside it are documents about our real fortune. If you find it, trust no one, not even those who share our blood. You are the only one who can open it. I left the keys, and I trust you'll understand everything when the time is right. Signed, Victor. I clenched the letter. No tears fell, but inside me, a cold tide surged like a deep current. So Victor knew. He knew a secret I'd never even touched. My eyes fell on the ring of keys. Each key was shaped differently, but the last one caught my breath. A golden key etched with my husband's family crest. That symbol, I had seen it only once, on the night he quietly locked the wine cellar door before he died. I rose to my feet, my heart heavy as stone. Everything suddenly fell into place. Why my children were desperate to sell the house so quickly. Why Clara and Robert kept meeting the lawyer behind my back. Perhaps they had known about the safe all along. I looked around Victor's room. Every familiar object seemed to whisper to me, "Mother, be strong." Downstairs, the back door creaked softly. I held my breath. For a split second, I felt someone was standing out there in the yard. But when I stepped into the hallway, the light spilling over the staircase revealed nothing but darkness. No one. Only the wind. And me. I returned to Victor's room, set the letter on the desk, and carefully slipped the keys into my pocket. The room no longer felt the same, as though an invisible door had opened in my life. Fear was there, yes, but something far stronger burned beneath it. Resolve. I understood then that from this moment on, this was no longer a mere inheritance dispute. This was war. A war within my own family, where the enemy did not stand outside the gate, but sat around the dinner table.
I stepped out of the room and closed the door behind me. The darkness of the hallway wrapped around me, but the fire inside me sharpened like a blade. They had forgotten one thing. I was the one who built this house, and if they want to take it from me, they'll have to face me first. I walked straight down to the cellar. The old house's blueprint came alive in my mind, the iron door behind the wall of the wine room. I gripped the ring of keys tightly, an uncanny feeling rising in me, as if Victor were still watching. Tonight, all the secrets buried within these cracked walls will begin to surface.
The old house had never been this quiet before, a silence that carried the scent of an approaching storm. I closed my eyes gently. Victor's words from the letter echoed once more in my mind. "Mother, you're the only one who can open it." I knew exactly what I had to do. It was time to lift the veil, even if everything collapsed afterward. I descended the basement stairs slowly. Each cold cement step led me deeper into a part of my memory I had tried so hard to bury. The air grew damp, thick with the scent of mold, rotting wood, and rusted metal, a cocktail of the past that had been sealed away. A small wall lamp flickered weakly, casting long distorted shadows like twisted figures on the walls. Then I saw it. The old steel door stood before me, hidden behind the wine room wall my husband had locked away years ago. No one had ever been allowed inside, not even the children. When he died, no one found the key. Now I knew Victor had kept it all along.
My hands trembled slightly as I slid the golden key into the lock. A sharp click rang out, echoing through the basement like a bell announcing a new fate. I drew a deep breath and turned the handle. The door opened, revealing not the vast cellar I had imagined, but a small windowless room sealed tight. In the corner sat a black safe embedded in the wall, covered in a thick coat of dust. The dim light from the hallway reflected off the steel like the cold stare of someone who had silently witnessed every sin. Victor hadn't just left me a key. He had left me a secret. I knelt down and found the last key on the ring, the one engraved with the same emblem etched into the safe. The lock groaned with each turn, heavy and deliberate, as if testing the will of the one opening it. When the final click broke the silence, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The safe door creaked open, and it wasn't just money inside. It was an entire hidden world. Dozens of files were stacked neatly, each carefully wrapped in moisture-proof covers. Among them lay a dark red leather notebook, Victor's notebook, the one I thought was lost the day he disappeared. I carefully lifted it onto my lap and opened the first page. Victor's familiar handwriting spilled across the page, sharp, hurried, but unmistakable. Mother, if you're reading this, remember, Elena is no longer the sister you once knew. She betrayed Victor and this entire family. My heart sank. I flipped through the following pages. There they were, numbers, bank statements, fake authorizations, forged signatures. Every piece of evidence pointed to Elena. She had siphoned off the company's funds for years, using Victor's name to cover her tracks, blaming partners when everything fell apart. And that wasn't all. In a separate file, I found court documents, evidence from a massive financial lawsuit tied to our family company. It had been silenced. Victor had collected proof to expose her, but disappeared before he could act. My hands turned ice cold. Elena, the daughter I once trusted above all others, the one I handed my faith to after their father died, the one who once sat in this very house, holding my hand and whispering, "I'll protect everything, Mother. Don't worry." She was the first to drive a knife into my back. A low, hoarse laugh escaped me, jagged, broken. Not the laugh of amusement, but of someone who realized they had been deceived for far too long. In the dark of the basement, that laugh echoed like a curse. I kept reading. Each document fed the fire building in my chest. Elena hadn't just stolen money. She had planned to sell the company itself, Victor's legacy, our family's name, to a foreign corporation. A deal that was only halted because Victor vanished. Then everything fell into place. Elena didn't just want wealth. She wanted power. She wanted to erase the past and rule everything. And now, this house was the final piece she needed to complete her game. Mother, you can't keep this house forever. Her words from the family meeting echoed sharply. Now I understood. She wasn't talking about the house. She was warning me. I set the notebook down and leaned my head against the icy wall. A single tear slid down my cheek, not out of weakness, but because the one who betrayed me was the very child I once raised and protected. But that tear fell only once. After that came only cold steel and resolve. I wrapped the files into a small black bag and locked the safe again. When I stood, my shadow stretched across the wall, no longer that of the gentle woman I once was. Each step I took up the basement stairs echoed like the opening drumbeat of a silent war. As I pushed open the kitchen door, the overhead light cast my reflection in sharp lines, hard, unyielding. If Elena had chosen to become my enemy, then I would respond in kind.
No longer the patient mother, but a woman ready to take back what was hers and Victor's.
I sat at the dining table and opened the bag again. Alongside the embezzlement evidence, there was an old will, my husband's will. It stated clearly, the house and the majority of the estate belong solely to me and Victor. Elena's name wasn't mentioned, nor Daniel's. A slow, deliberate smile crept to my lips. She had been too confident, too hasty, and now I held the ace she never saw coming. Above me, Elena's footsteps echoed from the second floor. She was home. The house trembled in a different way now, not from mold or cracks in the walls, but from the fractures in the trust that once bound this family together. I slid the black bag into the secret compartment beneath the table and lifted my gaze to the ceiling. Victor, my son, you've given me the weapon to fight, and I won't let them take a thing. The game had just begun. After discovering the horrifying secret inside the safe, evidence that could destroy Elena, I realized that silence was no longer an option. I had to fight. I had to find an ally strong enough to turn the truth into a weapon. And so, I turned to Sophia. The power game within this family had officially begun. I had spent my whole life nurturing, loving, and protecting this family. But perhaps I had forgotten that blind love can also be a form of self-imprisonment. That night, after the safe door shut, I sat motionless in the darkness for hours. The dim yellow light flickered down on the thick stack of files, old papers that carried the kind of truth capable of tearing a family apart. On the line signed by Elena's hand, I saw betrayal etched in cold strokes of ink, like a knife driven straight into my heart. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I was no longer the weak Maria, easily swayed by her children's tears. In that very moment, I knew I had to rise, not just to protect this house, but to protect what was left of my heart. Elena, you've gone too far, I whispered in the dark room, where the wind seeped through the cracks like vague warnings. Ever since Victor died, I had sworn to keep silent, for the children, for what they called family harmony. But now, I understood. My silence had become the perfect shield for Elena to hide her filth. She had embezzled money from the company Victor built with his own sweat, turning her father's legacy into shady investments. Then, with a heart of ice, she plotted to send her own mother to a nursing home, to make it easier to take everything for herself. I no longer felt my tears falling. All I felt was a fire burning wildly in my chest.
The next morning, the sky was gray. A silent drizzle fell upon the old tiled roof, like a mournful melody before the storm. I slipped into my dark sweater and stepped out of the mansion where I had imprisoned myself for years. For the first time in a long while, I was walking not for Elena, not for Daniel, but for me. I remembered what Victor once told me. Maria, if one day the people you love betray you, don't cry. Stand up, because you're stronger than you think. Those words, I had heard them before but never truly understood. Today they cut through the fog around my heart like a sharp blade. I couldn't fight Elena alone. She was smart, cunning, and merciless. She knew how to twist everything, turning the guilty into the innocent, the victim into the mad woman. To bring her down, I needed a plan. I needed someone to stand beside me, someone who could turn truth into a legal weapon. Then a name came to me. Sophia. She was the daughter of one of Victor's old friends, a young lawyer whose reputation was quickly rising. I had met her at a funeral a few years back. Bright eyes, a calm voice, and a strength far beyond her years. Back then, she told me something I never forgot. Aunt Maria, justice won't come if you just sit and wait for it to fall from the sky. I pressed my lips together. Perhaps this was the moment. When I stepped into Sophia's small law office, I immediately felt something different. There was no hollow luxury like in big firms, only pure white light, the scent of fresh paper, and sharp focus. Sophia looked up as I entered, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she smiled. Aunt Maria, it's been a long time. What brings you here? I sat down on the wooden chair, clutching my handbag tightly. Inside, Elena's files felt as if they were burning hot, a secret capable of destroying everything. I looked straight into Sophia's eyes and spoke slowly. I want to strike back. Sophia raised an eyebrow slightly but said nothing. I began to tell her everything, the strange doors, Elena's schemes, the hidden safe, and the incriminating documents. She didn't interrupt me once. Her eyes grew sharper with each detail, as if the puzzle pieces were falling into place, forming a brutal picture. Aunt Maria, Sophia finally said after a long silence, Elena didn't just break the law. She left a trail. If we do this right, I can help you regain full control of the estate. But are you sure you're ready? Because once we begin, there's no turning back. I looked at her. My hands trembled on the bag, but my heart did not. I've stayed silent for far too long, Sophia. It's time my daughter learned. Her mother is no longer weak. As Sophia laid out the first steps of the legal plan, I could feel the shift within myself. I was no longer the woman who cried alone at the empty dinner table after Victor's death. No longer the silent mother, watching her children tear each other apart. I became someone else. Someone who could wield truth like a blade and pain like armor. Sophia explained that the first step was to gather additional evidence, then quietly freeze several financial accounts under the company's name. If Elena reacted, that would be her biggest weakness, the moment everything she'd hidden would begin to surface. You must stay calm, Sophia warned. Your daughter won't let everything slip through her fingers easily, but because of that, she'll make mistakes. I nodded. Inside me, the storm of vengeance was growing, but it was no longer blind. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't shed tears. I would strike her where it hurts the most, her power. That night back at the mansion, I stood before the mirror. The woman staring back at me was no longer the Maria I once knew. The eyes were no longer soft with tears, the lips no longer trembling. In their place was a cold, resolute gaze,
the look of a mother who refuses to be betrayed.
"Elena," I whispered, pressing my hand against the icy glass, "you chose this path, so I'll walk it to the very end." In the darkness, the house itself seemed to change. It was no longer a cage for my fragile soul. It had become a battlefield, and this time, I would be the one leading the war.
But the next move in this war had to be made with wisdom. To unmask a traitor, sometimes you must pretend to be weak, and that was the path I chose. The morning after meeting with Sophia, I returned home with a calm face, as if nothing had happened. My heart was pounding fast. My mind was arranging each step like a game of chess. I knew Elena was watching, waiting for the smallest mistake to strike. If I acted too boldly, she would be on guard. If I appeared strong now, she would retreat and devise a new plan. So I had to become once again that lonely old mother, fragile, silent, easily swayed. That would be the perfect mask to hide my plan of gathering evidence. I started with the smallest things, pretending to forget names, fumbling with keys, asking the same questions over and over. At the dining table, I told old stories in a trembling voice. Stories about the days when Victor was still alive, about repairing the roof, about maintenance funds that now I couldn't quite remember where they went. Elena listened, nodding sympathetically, with a fleeting smile of triumph she thought no one noticed. Daniel looked at me with guilt, torn between wanting to protect his mother and surrendering to his sister's pressure. I didn't judge Daniel. He was still my flesh and blood, but I knew I had to give him time to awaken on his own. While I played my part, I worked silently. Sophia, the young lawyer, threw herself into preparing the necessary legal documents. Requests to freeze part of the company's accounts, demands for independent audits, and a ready-to-file criminal complaint. But Sophia's work alone wasn't enough. I needed more than the raw power of the law. I needed irrefutable proof, recordings, email chains, money transfer slips, and sometimes a confession that slips out unintentionally. So, I began to collect. I installed tiny cameras in hidden corners, inside a flower vase on the table, in the old clock, a small recorder tucked inside a thick technical book on the shelf. I learned to use them silently, as if relearning a craft. I remembered Victor once said, "To observe is to survive." Now I observed through machines and through eyes sharpened by the years. Elena kept acting caring and concerned. We sat together after lunch, and she feigned a conversation about insurance, home renovations, painting a picture of comfort. Once Mother moved somewhere more convenient. I allowed myself to shed a delicate tear, holding her hand like a trusting mother. That touch made Elena smile, a smile dripping with calculation. Inside, she thought she controlled the game. She had no idea that every word she spoke was captured, every gesture recorded. Once, Elena mentioned how she helped the company by advancing funds to partners, her eyes flashing a hint of pride as she described the strategic investments. She spoke to Daniel about optimizing assets, about temporary power of attorney, assuring him that Mother didn't need to worry about paperwork. I stayed silent, smiled, and pretended to forget what she had just said, but the recorder captured it all. I quietly saved the audio file and sent it anonymously to Sophia to examine its legal weight. Not only did I use cameras, I also wielded my feigned softness to draw out mistakes. One evening while discussing transfer papers, I deliberately complained to Elena about not understanding legal terms, asking over and over until she snapped and said bluntly, "Just let me handle it, Mom." Sign here and there. A sentence she thought was harmless was, in truth, a piece of evidence of manipulation. A part of me ached deeply hearing my own daughter speak to me that way. But that was the price of exposing the truth. I also began rummaging through forgotten drawers in the house, collecting receipts, invoices, and organizing everything I found in the safe,
in desks, in Victor's old notebooks. Each piece of paper was a puzzle piece. Every number was a pinprick in Elena's carefully painted mask. Sophia cross-checked those numbers with bank statements she had managed to temporarily freeze. The legal plan and the evidence-gathering plan were running in parallel, like two interlocking gears grinding down the traitor's ambition. Meanwhile, Elena began pushing the process by introducing a few real estate brokers. They arrived in suits, speaking professionally, carrying sample contracts and price charts. I welcomed them warmly, telling them, I need to think carefully, but never rushing. Every conversation was recorded.
One broker, boasting about how quickly they handled documents, unintentionally revealed a way to arrange paperwork to prove the property owner was no longer capable of managing assets. A legal term that sent a chill through me. I knew Elena had prepared meticulously, but every attempt to hide left cracks behind. Daniel was a delicate part of this plan. I didn't want to force my son to turn against his sister. His heart was still soft. Instead, I used love as a bridge, reminding him of old memories, of Victor's teachings, and their childhood bond. I subtly showed Daniel the evidence without shouting. Just a look. A few papers laid on the table while pouring tea, and I saw doubt begin to grow in him. That was a small but crucial victory, a child beginning to see the truth. Meanwhile, I also planted small, intentional hints around Elena, whispering things like, I could file a complaint if I had to. Just loud enough for her to overhear. It wasn't a threat, it was a test. And Elena reacted exactly as expected. She grew agitated, sending urgent messages to the brokers, pushing them to accelerate the process. Sophia had instructed me to screenshot and save every one of those messages. In her haste, Elena exposed herself in writing. Get this done fast. Don't give her time to react. That was written evidence of intent. Every night, sitting alone in my room, I opened the folders of collected proof, arranging them like a jeweler sorting precious stones. I remembered how meticulous Victor used to be. Now I was doing the work he left for me. Every piece of evidence was stored in 2 copies, one with Sophia and one hidden where only I knew. I also set small legal traps, power of attorney clauses requiring witnesses, pre-written lists of potential testifiers. Inside me, my emotions were a strange blend. Pain at my daughter's betrayal, quiet satisfaction at each piece of evidence coming together, and a cold resolve at the thought of dragging Elena into the light. I didn't want to destroy my family, but justice often demands the shattering of masks. I had given my life to build this home. If I let ambition take it away, Victor's sacrifices would be in vain. Finally, after weeks of feigned weakness, of collecting and provoking mistakes, Sophia called me with quiet triumph in her voice. Mrs. Maria, we have enough to secure a temporary freeze. Let them expose themselves. Then we'll ring the bell. I smiled, not the smile of a jubilant victor, but the smile of a mother who had found herself again, colder and stronger. The next step would be to lure the family into the transfer meeting, where Elena thought she would win, but I had already prepared everything to strip away her mask. I placed my hand on Victor's framed photo on the shelf and whispered, You see, don't you? You've given me the weapon. I'll use it to give her the justice she deserves, or the punishment she must face. Night fell, and the house grew silent, as if waiting for the next act of the play. I had played the role of the weak mother flawlessly, and now, with all the players on the stage, the game would finally be brought into the light. And from that silence, I walked straight into the trap Elena had so carefully prepared for herself. The transfer signing ceremony she believed would end everything, turning the house into money,
turning a mother into a convenient memory. The signing was set for a cloudy afternoon. Elena wanted everything to be fast, formal, and discreet. She invited the broker, 2 lawyers, one hers, the other claiming to represent me, someone I already knew was part of her calculated network, and a small administrative team from the real estate company. They arrived in crisp suits, with polished smiles and thick contracts in hand. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a temporary seller to be persuaded to sign a few pages and then disappear. I greeted them with a weary posture, my voice trembling like an old woman's. "All right, dear. I'll listen to you." I poured the tea, smiled faintly, and let the scene unfold exactly as Elena had planned it. She sat beside me, her hand gently holding mine as if to comfort me, but her eyes cold. I had seen those eyes 100 times before on the face of someone who once deceived their own mother. The signing began. The broker started with elegant terminology, market value, optimization process, authorization confirmation. Elena handed me a thick envelope containing a summary of figures, projects, and promises to take care of me for the rest of my life. The way she presented it could make any outsider believe this was a decision made for my own good. I pretended to skim through the pages, smiling and nodding vaguely at the legal jargon. Inside, I felt as though my heart was standing outside my body, observing their every move. Every word, every glance, every pause could be a clue, and I had prepared to capture them all.
Weeks earlier, I had quietly placed tiny cameras where they would never think to look, inside the flower vase on the table, behind the family photo frame, even inside an old wall clock. Those small devices had recorded their voices, their glances, and the numbers Elena believed only a select few knew. I knew the law. Sophia had taught me how to gather admissible evidence, but I also knew one thing. Nothing is more damning than someone's own words. When the broker began reading the clause about legal representatives signing on behalf of the homeowner when they are unavailable, Elena smiled sweetly and whispered into Daniel's ear, "Sign it, honey." Mom already agreed, Daniel faltered. I looked at him, my eyes asking, "Do you hear this?" He lowered his head, his hands trembling, but he didn't pull away. He was my son, but fear and confusion had weakened him. I swallowed the pain, resting my hand on his shoulder naturally so as not to raise suspicion. Then came the part where they wanted me to sign each page, a long document with tiny print in legal language so dense that anyone unfamiliar with contracts could easily lose their way. Elena stood up, playing the role of the dutiful daughter. She leaned down, whispering, "Just sign here and here, Mom. You trust me, don't you?" Her voice was soft, but her face was ice. At that moment, Elena believed she had won. She didn't know that beneath my frail appearance was a cold, unwavering resolve. I placed the pen on the paper, hesitated for exactly 1 second, just enough for her to smile in triumph, and then I signed. I signed like someone surrendering something that no longer had any meaning to their soul. But in my pocket, my fingers clutched the small remote linked to the cameras, and on Sophia's computer, the files had already been safely uploaded. The signing continued.
Convinced that they had won, the broker began bragging about the solutions they could implement to streamline the process, putting me in a nursing home, falsifying medical records, appointing a temporary guardian. Elena spoke those words with glee, as if their plan were flawless. One careless staff member blurted out, "As long as she shows a few memory lapses, we're good." That careless line cracked through the room like a lightning strike. I felt my blood boil, but my face remained blank, carved from stone. Everything was being recorded. Every word, every gesture, every calculated reassurance. Sophia, sitting in her office not far away, had heard everything through a secure feed. She sent a short message to my wrist device. "Stay calm. We have enough." When Elena began reading the vague clause granting temporary signing rights, I tightened my grip on the pen. In my head, Sophia's plan,
freezing the account the moment any sign of fraud appeared was going live.
I nodded faintly as if oblivious, but inside, I was ready. For the first time, Daniel was silent for too long. He lifted his head, eyes red, and suddenly said something that silenced the room. "Elena, I think we should slow down. Mom looks tired." Elena widened her eyes, caught off guard, then laughed it off nervously. "It's fine. Just paperwork." But her tone cracked, a tiny fracture in the mask. That was the moment we'd been waiting for. A mistake. A reaction she failed to hide. And the mistake came faster than they imagined. When the broker was about to hand the file to the lawyer representing me, Elena rushed a phone call, unintentionally revealing snippets of a conversation she thought no one else could hear. "Keep her a little confused. Have the doctor write something up. Just a few documents and the power of attorney goes through smoothly." That voice, unguarded, fell straight into the recorder hidden inside the frame. I exhaled softly, my heart turning to ice. In my mind, the months of gathering evidence formed a clear picture. The statements, the emails, the forged transactions, and now this careless sentence, the final puzzle piece. Sophia had already prepared the legal filing, ready to submit the moment proof of fraudulent intent appeared. As the signing concluded, Elena smiled like a victor, unaware that in her pocket, defeat was already sealed. The audio recorded, the video stored, and Sophia holding copies of it all. They thought they'd deceived me, but they had handed me the key to their own downfall. When they left, leaving the room steeped in silence, the scent of tea and paper still lingering, I rose, walked to the frame where the camera was hidden, retrieved the key, and smiled faintly. The sound of the waves outside crashed against the windows like distant applause. I knew I had won a battle, but the war was far from over. I placed my hand over my chest, feeling my heart beat, and whispered to myself, "Do you see this, Victor? I'm no longer that weak mother. I've learned how to make greed reveal itself, and as night fell, I was ready to pull the curtain back, to a place where Elena would have nowhere left to hide." The next morning, when the mist was still thin upon the leaves, I carried the black bag filled with all the evidence down to the study. The bag was as heavy as the past itself, but I wasn't carrying it to torment myself. I was carrying it to deliver it to justice. Sophia was waiting for me at the office, her eyes lighting up the moment she saw me walk in with the file. I set the bag down on the table, and she didn't speak right away. She simply looked at me, as if to measure the soul of the person standing before her. "Don't worry," she said, her voice steady as steel. "I've copied everything, stored it in 2 secure locations, and I'll file the petition the moment we need it." I answered with a slow nod, feeling the weight of my breath ease just slightly. There was no shouting, no chaos. What Sophia called the silent fury began with quiet, deliberate steps. The first task was to verify the chain of evidence. Sophia had me review every item, sign each receipt, and together we built a meticulous inventory. The audio recordings of the signing, the hidden camera footage, the forged bank statements, the fake contracts, the list of witnesses, and the original will. Everything needed a seal, a date, a signature. Not because I wanted to flaunt anything, but because Elena and her accomplices would try to deny everything. I signed each page like I was stamping a curse. After that, Sophia filed for a temporary injunction to freeze certain company accounts and assets at risk of being transferred. Her voice was soft but unwavering when she said, "If they move the money, everything could disappear in a matter of hours. We need immediate court intervention." I understood this was a decisive move. If it succeeded, Elena wouldn't be able to drain the accounts or sell the house with her tricks. If it failed, I would lose my greatest advantage, time. There's something strange about handing the truth over to someone else. A part of me wanted to storm into the bank myself, stand at the door and scream.
But Sophia pulled me back from that temptation with just a look. Don't let emotion ruin the evidence. The law plays with proof, not noise. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and thought of Victor, of his words about caution. I listened. Once the files were submitted, Sophia began calling the witnesses we'd lined up. The company's former cashier, an accountant Elena had once threatened, and an independent lawyer who used to work with Victor. They agreed to testify and provide written statements. Sophia also requested an independent audit report and scheduled a meeting with the authorities to examine suspicious transactions. Everything happened quietly, without fanfare, but the speed of it made me both anxious and hopeful. Meanwhile, out there, Elena was still living in the naive arrogance of a temporary Victor. She stuck to her schedule, meeting potential buyers, signing internal documents, pressuring Daniel to act as a witness to the power of attorney. She still called me with her sweet practice voice. "Mom, have you eaten yet? Don't forget to take your medicine." I heard those calls through the door like a counterfeit echo sealing the entire script. She didn't know that every affectionate word, every failed call, every rushed conversation could be recorded and used against her. I knew Elena wouldn't be caught easily. Clever people know how to hide, behind gentle words, behind convoluted contracts, behind carefully vague sentences that make outsiders lose their way. But because they trust their ability to hide too much, they often make mistakes in moments of self-satisfaction. Sophia told me, "Let them act. We'll strike at their first mistake." I agreed, but my heart remained restless. I spent my nights awake, watching over the stack of documents like someone guarding a flame. One day, Daniel came to Sophia's office alone. He sat across from me, his hands twisting as if trying to hold himself together. He didn't need me to ask. Fragments of confession spilled out. "Mom, I don't want to cause trouble." I took his hand, small, cold. I told him something very simple. "You're my son. If you want to stand by me, I won't ask you to do anything grand. Just don't sign what you don't understand. Don't let anyone fool you." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. For the first time in months, I saw a spark of clarity in him. On Elena's side, she began showing signs of impatience. One afternoon, she called the house, her voice sharp. "Have you signed yet? We need progress." I answered in the distant, vague tone they were used to. "I'm still thinking." She barked through the phone. That sound made me sick, but I remained silent. I knew every time she lost her temper, she revealed another crack, and those cracks would become evidence. The legal battle was like a soft rain falling in the night, quiet, persistent, seeping into the ground. Sophia updated me on each step: the temporary freeze order under review, a subpoena to the bank for statements, and a court summons being prepared for Elena. Each update felt like a brick being laid into the foundation of the justice I was building. I couldn't help imagining the moment Elena would realize what had happened, standing in a boardroom, reading a subpoena, finding her accounts frozen, or watching the footage of the signing played out in front of the brokers. But I didn't want to revel in her pain. What I sought was justice, not a cheap revenge. And yet, deep down, the betrayal still made my heart shrink whenever I thought of Elena's cold smile. The day the court granted the temporary freeze, Sophia embraced me gently, as if comforting a mother standing on the edge. "You did the right thing," she whispered. I could only smile, tears rolling down my cheeks. Not from pain, but from a tangled surge of emotions. Relief, and also a quiet heaviness. I had spent a lifetime protecting these things, and now I knew I could keep them. But the price was everything. Hardship, fracture, and a kind of loss that can't be mended. Elena still didn't know she'd already stepped into a trap. She treated it all like a simple financial equation, and that was her greatest mistake. Believing money could buy everything, even a mother's heart. But I was different. I bought the truth back with clarity, with dry tears and with a silent fury strong enough to shatter every scheme. That night, I sat by the window, watching the distant lights. The sound of the waves kept breaking on the shore, soft but steady, like the breath of someone who waits. I placed my hand on the folder, feeling the paper beneath my fingers, and whispered into the dark. "Wait for it, Elena."
The truth is coming, quiet but undeniable.
I sat by the window, listening to the waves crash against the shore, like the steady heartbeat of time itself. I knew the real storm hadn't begun yet. What I had set in motion wasn't just a small game of chess. It was a family war, where there would be no more hugs, no more sweet cries of mother, only raw, unvarnished truth. And just as I predicted, it began on a cloudy morning when Elena received the first letter from the court and the bank. She opened the envelope at the front door, while I watched from the upper floor, a silent shadow. Her eyes, at first confused, quickly turned into a rage so fierce it nearly burned through the quiet air. The paper in her hand trembled, and she screamed into the phone, calling Daniel. Her voice sliced through the stillness of the house like a knife. "Daniel! Why didn't you tell me? Why did the bank freeze the accounts? Why is my name on the court summons?" I heard every word, not missing a single sound.
Each sentence she hurled carried nothing of the little girl who once curled up in my arms during a storm. The woman standing there now was someone else entirely, a creature panicked by the crumbling of her power. Daniel rushed home in a daze. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loose, as if he'd dropped everything to get back. "Elena, calm down," he said, his voice trembling with fear. But Elena was far beyond calm. She hurled the stack of papers straight at her brother's face. "Calm down? Do you even realize everything's frozen? The entire plan has collapsed," she screamed, her breath sharp and uneven. "What did you tell Mother, Daniel? Did you betray me?" Daniel backed away, confused. What? What are you talking about? I didn't do anything. I just didn't sign the transfer papers anymore. I needed time to think. That single, hesitant sentence was the spark that ignited the war.
Elena became a cornered animal, her eyes sharp, her voice a blade slicing straight through her brother's heart. "You idiot! If you hadn't hesitated, everything would have been done by now. You ruined it, Daniel. You betrayed me." From behind the staircase, I watched my two children hurl words at each other like strangers. This house, once filled with laughter and games, now echoed with shouting, slamming fists against the wall, and cruel, cutting words. Pain throbbed deep inside me. And yet, strangely, a shard of clarity pierced through it. Truth is merciless, but it must be revealed. Daniel lowered his head, as if struck down by the very person he trusted most. "Don't you see this is wrong?" he croaked. "You want to take the house, send Mom to a nursing home, and now you're blaming me because you're being sued? Elena, you've changed." Elena laughed, a twisted, cold, contemptuous laugh. "Changed? I just want what's mine. This house should have been mine a long time ago. And Mother? She's clinging to the past, rotting away in this old place. Has she ever once thought about my future?" My hand tightened around the banister. My heart clenched. So this was it. Deep inside, Elena had been nursing a resentment I had ignored, or perhaps refused to see. That tiny seed had grown into the greed and betrayal standing before me. Daniel shook his head, tears slipping down as he whispered, "No, Elena. This isn't the sister I knew. The sister I knew would never do this to Mom.
Their confrontation tore through the living room like a storm, not with wind, but with words and wounds. Elena slammed her hand on the table and stormed upstairs, the door slamming shut behind her. Daniel stood frozen, chest heaving as if he'd just run through a hailstorm. I descended the stairs slowly, silently. Daniel looked at me. His eyes carried the weight of a child abandoned. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't want this to happen."
I wrapped my arms around him, weak but steady enough to hold him. "I know," I whispered into his ear, "but you need to see clearly now. Truth is never kind, Daniel, but you must know who's truly standing by your side."
The family storm had broken loose. From this moment on, there would be no more cheerful meals together, no more gentle "Mom" whenever Elena needed my signature, no more fragile harmony built on lies. Instead, there were now two clear battle lines, one of truth and one of greed. And amidst the chaos, I saw something else. Daniel had awakened. His eyes no longer held the haze of denial. He saw Elena, not as the sister he once trusted, but as the enemy she had become. That was the first step, the key in the plan Sophia and I had crafted. One person turning back is sometimes more powerful than any stack of evidence. That night, the house was cloaked in heavy silence. Elena locked herself in her room. Daniel sat alone in the kitchen, head buried in his hands.
I sat across from him, pouring him a cup of hot tea. Steam rose between us like a thin veil. I didn't say much. Instead, I told him an old story about the first night Victor laid the bricks of this house, about the storms we endured together, sealing every gap, about the promise that this place would always be a home, not a battlefield. Daniel sat quietly, tears falling onto his shirt. "Mom, I won't let her hurt you again." Those words were soft, but to me, they rang like a vow. In the darkness, I squeezed his hand, the hand that had once wavered, but now had returned. Upstairs, Elena was no doubt raging, breaking things, cursing someone over the phone. But I didn't need to run after her anymore. I was no longer the weak mother trying to patch the cracks left by betrayal. I had chosen a different path, the one Elena herself had forced me onto, the path of truth. And I knew, after this storm, there would be no peace.
There would be an earthquake, a reckoning, when all secrets are dragged into the light. Because the next chapter of this war will no longer be confined within these walls. It will unfold before the public, before the court, before every pair of eyes Elena once tried to deceive. And that is where I will strike, my real counterattack. That morning, the sky was heavy and gray, as if the entire city itself were holding its breath, waiting for a storm to break. I stood before the mirror for a long time. Every wrinkle on my face, every age spot on my hands was a trace of the years I had lived, endured, and swallowed my tears in silence. But today, I was no longer the silent mother hiding in the shadows. Today, I held the scales in my hands, and I would let the truth step out into the light, just as Victor had once wished. The grand living room of the mansion, once filled with family gatherings and laughter, had now become a battlefield. Elena sat on the sofa, arms crossed, eyes sharp as blades, though I could see the flicker of unease beneath that stare. Daniel sat across from her, quiet, but no longer evasive. Sophia, the young lawyer I trusted, stood beside me, placing the stack of documents we had prepared for weeks onto the wooden table. Everything was ready. "Let's begin," Sophia said softly, her gaze as sharp as a knife. I lifted my head, looking straight at Elena. My voice no longer trembled as it once had when betrayal first struck. "Elena, you've always wanted to know what I was planning, haven't you?"
Elena let out a scornful laugh. Of course! What is it this time? Are you finally going to sign the house over to me, or keep playing your little games? I smiled faintly, a smile that made her falter for just a second. No, I won't be signing anything today. I'm simply honoring your father's last wishes. Sophia opened the briefcase and carefully took out a sealed envelope. On its surface was Victor's familiar handwriting, a sight that pierced through me like a blade. For years I had kept this letter in the safe, along with evidence and his final words. Sophia placed it gently on the table and spoke firmly. This is the original will of Mr. Victor, the founder of the company, the owner of this mansion, and the father of you both.
The air thickened. Elena sat upright, her eyes flickering with the panic she tried so hard to suppress. Daniel frowned, clearly unprepared for the gravity of what this meeting would bring. Sophia opened the envelope and unfolded the yellowed papers. Her voice rang out steady and clear. According to the will signed 13 years ago, Mr. Victor stated, all assets, including company shares, real estate, and fixed properties, shall only be transferred to the child who preserves family values, remains loyal, and does not betray. In the event that both fail to meet these conditions, all assets will be transferred to the Family Charity Foundation. The words fell like thunder from a clear sky. Elena's face turned pale. She jumped to her feet, almost shouting, "This is impossible! Father never said that! This is fake!" Sophia didn't flinch. This document was notarized and stored at the law firm on July 14th, 13 years ago. This is a legally certified copy.
And furthermore, she paused and looked at me. Slowly, I took a small USB drive from my pocket, my final weapon for this day. In here, I said deliberately, is a recording of Victor reading his will in front of witnesses. His voice, Elena, you will recognize it. Elena stumbled back a step. Mother, you're setting me up, aren't you? I met her gaze without hesitation. My eyes were no longer those of a weak, pleading woman. No, Elena, this is the truth. You set yourself up the day you chose to betray your father. Sophia plugged the USB into the laptop. A familiar voice filled the room, Victor's deep, steady tone, brimming with conviction. Maria, if you're hearing this, it means the time has come to make a choice. I don't want our children turning this house into a battlefield. Whoever betrays this family will lose everything. Each word struck Elena like a blade. Her face went chalk white. Her eyes trembled with fury, fear, and disbelief. No, this can't be, she stammered, tears streaming down her face, not from regret, but from the shock of watching the wall of power she had built collapse in a single instant. Daniel clenched his fists, lifting his head to look at his sister with quiet devastation. Elena, you've lost. I stood and walked slowly toward Elena. You thought I knew nothing. You thought I was weak, easy to manipulate. But Elena, you forgot one thing. Your father trusted me the most, and I kept my promise to him. Elena collapsed onto the sofa, covering her face as she cried, not the tears of a child seeking forgiveness, but the tears of someone who had lost everything. The mansion, the company, the wealth, the power, everything she had schemed to seize was now slipping through her fingers. Sophia closed the file with finality. Her voice was clear and decisive. From this moment, all assets will be placed under temporary management by Mrs. Maria until legal procedures are completed.
Elena no longer holds any decision-making power over any family property. Silence enveloped the room. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily as if counting down to a new chapter of my life.
Daniel stepped toward me and gently placed his hand on my shoulder. His eyes were warm, but behind them lingered a quiet sorrow for a broken family. "Mom, we'll start over, right?" I looked at Daniel and nodded softly. "Yes, my son, but this time, no more betrayal." Across from us, Elena lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen, yet burned with resentment. I knew the war wasn't truly over. My daughter wasn't the type to surrender easily, but I too was no longer the woman I used to be, timid, fragile, endlessly forgiving. I had restored justice for Victor and for myself. More importantly, I had torn away the veil of years built on lies. Outside, rain began to fall. It pattered on the roof, slipped through the old window frames like a silent applause from fate. I stood gazing at the house, the place that held so many memories. It was no longer a grave for the past, but the beginning of something new. And I knew, though Elena had fallen today, the aftershocks of this storm would echo far beyond. Not because of money, but because the fractures in a mother-daughter bond never fully heal. But I had no regrets. There are battles a mother must win, not just to protect her wealth, but to protect her soul. The room was so silent I could hear the second hand of the clock sliding past each tick. After the reading of the will, Elena left without saying a word. Her face was pale, her eyes empty, like someone whose soul had just been drained away. I remained in that room, breathing in the icy metallic scent of the safe, the musty smell of old papers, and the sharp scent of victory. But it wasn't a sweet victory. It was the victory of a mother who had walked through the deepest pain to reclaim justice, for her late husband and for herself. I walked toward the window. Outside, the winter wind began to whistle through the bare branches, as if the universe itself wanted to witness a new chapter in this silent war. But I knew well, this wasn't the end. The will was only the first blow. The truth would make Elena pay a far heavier price. Elena never imagined I had kept copies of the company's financial records, the very documents Victor had trusted me with during his final days. At that time, I didn't fully understand the numbers, the quiet transfers between accounts. But now, I had Sophia, the young lawyer who pieced together what once seemed like meaningless fragments into a complete picture. And in that picture, Elena was the one who had painted it with ambition, betrayal, and the blood of her own family. Only a few days after the reading of the will, everything began to move like dominoes falling one after another. I received the first call from the independent auditing firm Sophia worked with. The man's voice on the other end was cold. "Mrs. Maria, we have enough evidence." The embezzlement didn't stop at 1 year. It's been going on for 4, all under Elena's direction. I fell silent, not because I was surprised, but because in that moment, memories came flooding back to when Victor was still alive. He had once entrusted Elena with part of the company, calling her the pride of the family. He had believed his daughter would inherit his legacy, protect the empire he had built with his own hands. He never imagined that this pride would bleed the company dry, penny by penny, contract by forged contract. Sophia appeared in my living room on a rainy afternoon. She placed a thick stack of documents in front of me. The softness in her eyes was gone. What remained was the fire of a warrior. "Are you ready?" Sophia asked. I clenched the teacup in my hand. The tea had gone cold, but my hand burned hot. "I've waited for this moment for over 20 years, I answered slowly but firmly. That night, the lawsuit was officially filed. All the evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and concealed assets was sent to the investigators and the court. Every trace Elena had left behind during the years she thought were flawless had now turned into legal blades, pointing straight at her. The next day, the financial press began to buzz. A company once praised for its transparency and model family leadership was now at the center of an investigation. Elena's name appeared in the headlines, not with the title of Brilliant CFO, but as the prime suspect in the embezzlement of family company funds. I sat in Victor's office, the very place where he once wrote his first contracts. Outside, the rain kept falling. I imagined him sitting across from me, his kind eyes filled with sorrow and longing. I whispered, "Victor, you can finally rest now." Across the city, Elena was living the darkest days of her life. Friends avoided her. Business partners pulled away. She received an official summons from the court. The woman who once strode confidently in expensive high heels now hid inside her private apartment, afraid to step outside. Daniel, the son I once feared would become her accomplice, was finally seeing everything clearly.
I heard the siblings had a fierce argument when Daniel discovered Elena hadn't only lied to their father and me, but to him as well. The bond that had once tied them together had now shattered beyond repair. But what haunted me the most wasn't the money. It was the raw truth about my own family. I had given birth to a child capable of betraying her own blood, and it had taken me nearly half a lifetime to expose it. This victory brought no joy, only a deep, permanent scar. Sophia called me that night. "Mrs. Maria, they'll soon issue the order to freeze all assets under Elena's control. This will be a major case, and you will no longer be the passive one." I lifted my head toward the ceiling. The old cracks were still there, like the secrets this house had swallowed for years. But this time, I wasn't hiding. I was strong enough to face everything. On the morning of the first trial, I stood before the mirror and adjusted my silver hair. I was no longer the fragile, betrayed mother of the past. I was Maria, the woman who had endured 2 decades of silence to reclaim justice. Outside, the wind howled. The door closed behind me like a final period at the end of a long, bitter sentence. This was no longer just a family conflict. It was the reckoning Elena would face, the sentence born from her own sins. I stepped out of the house and took a deep breath. The cold air sharpened my senses. In my mind, Victor's old words echoed. Betrayal doesn't kill a family overnight. It kills slowly, piece by piece. But the truth is the final blade. Elena had chosen betrayal, and now she would pay the price. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind me, like a bell marking the end of a storm that had raged for years. Elena was convicted. Her name appeared on every headline, no longer as an heiress of prestige, but as a traitor to her family, a criminal paying the price for what she had done. When the judge's gavel struck for the last time, I didn't clap. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I simply stood in silence, as if my heart had walked through a war so long and so merciless that it no longer had the strength to tremble. I stepped out of the courthouse into a light drizzle on a gray afternoon. The rain soaked into my silver hair, seeped through my coat. The wind was cold, and yet, for the first time in decades, I felt like I could finally breathe. The heavy steps I had carried for 20 long years suddenly felt weightless, as though an invisible stone had been lifted from my chest. On the courthouse steps, Sophia waited with a small umbrella. Her eyes shone, not with triumph, but with quiet understanding. "You did it, Maria," she said softly, her voice cutting through the pale curtain of rain. I smiled. It wasn't a proud smile, nor a victorious one. It was the smile of a mother who had lost everything, and now stood again, not to reclaim wealth, but to reclaim the life that was rightfully hers. In the days that followed, the old mansion became my daily sanctuary. Once a place that imprisoned my darkest memories, it now welcomed me like an old friend. I cleaned each room, dusted off the framed photographs,
sealed the cracks I had ignored for so many years. And then I realized I no longer wanted to leave. The house was no longer a monument of sorrow. I wanted it to become a tribute to Victor, the man who loved me and the one who suffered the deepest betrayal. I preserved his study as it had been, the old wooden desk, the wedding photograph, his unfinished notebooks.
The living room, once a battlefield of family arguments, was now lit with warm golden lamps, the gentle scent of lavender filling the air. I no longer ran from my memories. I faced them, with the strength I had forged through half a lifetime of pain. One late afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the windows, I opened the house to the older women in the neighborhood. They too had known loss, lives abandoned at the edges of the world, just like I had once been abandoned in these cold walls. I set up a small corner for us to weave, sew, craft little things where every stitch carried a piece of someone's story. Laughter echoed through the house that had once been suffocatingly silent. In their bright, resilient eyes, I found fragments of myself. One woman asked me, "Maria, aren't you afraid to stay in this house? It used to hold so much darkness." I smiled gently and answered, "Exactly because it held darkness, I want it to hold light."
If we don't turn pain into a place of rebirth, who will? Sophia still visited me from time to time. Not as a lawyer anymore, but as a friend. We would sit on the porch, sipping tea, watching the sunset over the little garden. She once told me I had inspired her, that not every war ends in loss. Some end in rebirth. I gazed into the distance where Victor's rose bushes had begun to bloom again after a long winter. The petals trembled in the soft breeze, as if he were smiling at me from somewhere far away. I whispered to myself, "I did it, Victor. This house is no longer a place of lies." I knew Elena was still serving her sentence, and it would be a long time before she could truly face what she had done. But I no longer hated her. I no longer lived to avenge. I lived to be free. Every morning I opened the door to the sunlight, listened to the birds singing on the roof, smelled the scent of toast from the old oven Victor once repaired with his own hands. Everything in this house no longer spoke of betrayal, but of love, the love I had fought so hard to protect. And when the women gathered here every Saturday morning, the house was no longer cold. It had become a shelter, a place of healing. I had spent 20 years in silence, but the rest of my life, I will live in the light. As a mother, as a wife, as a woman who walked through the storm and remained standing. That afternoon, as the crimson sunset wrapped the house in its warm glow, I sat on the porch and placed my hand on Victor's photograph. "Thank you," I whispered, "for giving me a reason to fight and a home to return to. No more storms, no more fear. Only me, Maria, a mother who had come home." That night, the sea breeze whispered through the trees around the old mansion, carrying the chill of salt air and a scent I knew by heart. The scent of nights when Victor and I used to sit together on the porch, listening in silence to the sound of the waves. The house now glowed with warm light, bright, alive, no longer a place built on lies and suspicion. It stood as proof of a war I had fought to its very end, not with hatred, but with an unshakable belief that justice always carries its own weight. After the last afternoon of our weekly craft session, when all the women had gone home, I stayed alone in the living room. On the table sat the old wedding photo of Victor and me. It all began from that moment, a pure love, a peaceful home, until betrayal crept in like a cold wind. But now the circle had closed. I was no longer the fragile woman standing behind someone else's shadow. Elena was gone. Not in glory, not in the tears of loved ones. She left in a silence so sharp it echoed. After the final trial, she chose to move away from the city,
No apology, not even a glance back at the house that once belonged to her own family. The ambitious, calculating woman she once was had paid dearly, not just to the law, but to the unbearable loneliness she had built for herself. When fame, money, and power crumbled, all that remained was her own shadow in a rented apartment, far from everything. Daniel was different. When the truth came to light, he stayed, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps because the love he carried for me had never truly disappeared, only buried beneath the blind loyalty to a sister he trusted too much. I remember that day vividly. Daniel kneeling at the porch, his hands trembling as he held mine. His proud eyes had vanished, leaving only the remorse of a lost child who had wandered too far. "Mom, I'm sorry." Just 3 words, but they shattered the ice around my heart. Forgiveness didn't come easily.
It never does. But I chose to open a small door for him to step back through, because I knew if Victor were still alive, he would have done the same. From that day, Daniel returned to the mansion, not as an heir, but as a son. He helped me repair the roof, tended the old garden, repainted the walls that had cracked and faded under years of storms and silence. Each small act was like a needle stitching together the torn fabric of my heart. Sometimes Daniel still asked about Elena. He didn't hate her, but he no longer defended her either. I always answered him with silence, because some things don't need words. Time will speak for itself, and Elena had chosen her path. That night, after Daniel wished me good night and went to his room, I stood by the second-floor window overlooking the distant shoreline. The water was dark, reflecting the silver moon like a giant mirror. The steady rhythm of the waves against the shore filled the night, like a song that had played my whole life. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash through me. Each wave carried a memory. Victor's laughter when I clumsily broke the teapot, his eyes when he held our children close. That last night when he placed his hand on mine and said, "Keep this house. It's the soul of us." And I had kept it, not just for him, but for myself. In the darkness, I drew back the curtain and let the moonlight spill across my face. In the reflection of the window, I saw a different woman, not the frightened, fragile mother of 20 years ago, but a Maria who was strong, calm, and quiet like the sea at night. I had not let hatred consume me. I had turned it into a weapon, and then laid it down when the battle was done. Elena was no longer a shadow lurking in my life. She had stepped out of the story, the way fate chooses for those who betray blood. And Daniel, the son who had once lost his way, now stood by my side, like a small light in a house that had once been swallowed by darkness. I whispered into the night, "Victor, can you hear me? It's over now." The wind gently stirred the curtains. The sea answered in its endless song. In that moment, I smiled. Not a triumphant smile, not a bitter one, just a soft, quiet smile. The smile of someone who had survived the storm, who had reclaimed justice and freedom. This revenge was never sweet. It was carved in tears, betrayal, loss, and countless lonely nights. But it was also the journey that led me back to myself. A mother who refused to break, a woman who learned to rise. I closed the window, leaving the moonlight shimmering on the sea behind me. In the old house, the ticking of the grandfather clock echoed steadily, beat by beat, counting the remaining chapters of my life. But I no longer feared time, because I had already won, not against Elena, but against the fear that once lived inside me. And so, that night, Maria, the silent, underestimated mother, smiled by the old window, listening to the sea, letting the night wind cradle her into a new beginning.
A chapter had closed, not with the scream of hatred, but with the stillness of justice.